Molly, how's it going? Welcome to the platform. How you doing?
Thanks for having me. I'm doing great.
No, it's good to have you here, and I'm really happy and excited to jump into the things we're going to jump into, just based on like what you do.
Oh my God. Okay, what do I do? All right, you'll have to ask me something specific.
Oh no. We're gonna get very specific.
I know.
But how's life been in general?
It's been weird. It's been it's been weird and wonderful and weird. I mean, this last couple of years,
Yeah.
who knows who they are anymore?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, it's been a yeah, it's been a I mean, reconfiguring on all kinds of levels and
Right.
but I think we needed this. I think this was, I mean, it certainly didn't answer all the questions, but
Right.
I think that we needed this 2 year
Right.
time of reflection.
Right. It definitely showed questions that needed to be answered that maybe we was avoiding
Yeah.
or ignoring or
Or new
neglecting.
questions that we've never
Yeah,
even,
yeah, true. Yeah, true. And so, for people who may not know who Molly Secours is, I said that right?
Secours.
Secours.
But let's just
Molly
say there's a lot of people
Secours.
that don't know. So go ahead.
But you're so let's get into like your background, right? How does somebody like yourself get into trying to dismantle white privilege, be an anti-racist? Um,
Okay.
how did that like?
Can
Yeah,
I-
start wherever you want to start
Okay, I'm
from.
going to start with I didn't want to. Okay, this is not anything this was not this is not what I planned for my life.
What-
I grew up in a small town called Messina, New York, upstate New York. There was one black person. There might have been more than one, but only one that I knew.
Right.
And I don't think there was. He was adopted. We actually know each other now and are friends, but everyone was aware of this guy named Lyle Baxter. We all knew who he was. He was very popular. He was older than me, so you know how that thing is. 3 grades ahead. It's like, oh my God. So he didn't know I existed, but I
Right.
knew he existed. And he was in this small town in upstate New York, adopted. And he was a basketball player. He was voted, I think he was class clown. I think he was most likely to do
succeed
everything.
and
Everyone
everything,
loved
right.
him. So we grew up under the impression that there was no such thing as racism in
Right.
Messina, New York. At least I did.
Right.
But I had an inkling that there was something else going on because I also lived very close to a reservation. And the way that Native people were treated, I saw it everywhere.
Right.
So I knew something was up with that. So that very early on, I had
Right.
this, like, that didn't feel good to me. And
Right.
but I did give very much thought. You live in a community
Right.
in upstate New York. You've met one black person who doesn't know who you are,
Right.
who's not exactly your friend.
Right.
And so anyway, I had that. That's the background. I moved away when I was a teenager, very young, 16. I graduated from high school. And I left and I never really went back. And I started out, I ended up being in Caribou, Maine for a while. And then I was in San Francisco, then Denver, then back in New York, then Florida. And so I moved all around. Los Angeles.
Right.
I lived a lot of different places, met a lot of different people.
Right.
And even then, my consciousness about the issues of race, I wasn't an activist. I was somebody who was concerned, but I wasn't doing anything. There wasn't
Right.
anything. And when I was in Los Angeles, and I know this is long, but when I was in Los Angeles, I was an actor for about 10 years. And I lived
wow.
I know that's a whole nother lifetime.
It's a whole nother life.
It's a whole nother life. But I was doing theater and film and mostly just auditioning in LA. I was trying to be an actor.
Right.
I'm going to do that for the camera with my little Band-Aid. And so I realized, I woke up one day and was like, A, I'm not getting much work, and B, I don't want to spend my life waiting
Right.
to be chosen. And it just, something inside me was like, this is not right. This is not who I am. And in the meantime, I met a musician, fell in love. He was moving to Nashville to release a record back in the day when it meant something to release a record.
Right.
And I moved here sight unseen, never been to the South. I mean, never been south of the Mason-Dixon line except to
Wow.
Florida, which I don't count.
And what year was this?
This would have been 1994.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm old.
No, I'm trying to. 94, just make sure.
No,
Okay,
don't. Please
Nashville
don't
was
do
a
too
different-
much math. Okay, let's just not get into a lot of math here. And so I'm on the plane. I've never visited Nashville. I'm coming here to be with a man that I've only been dating for 9 months. And I'm on the plane, and all of a sudden, in mid, 35,000 feet, I went, what in the world are you doing moving to Nashville, Tennessee? I had no idea what I was doing. And as soon as I asked the question, in my head, I heard, and it wasn't an audible voice, not everybody else heard it, but I heard it. It said, there's a lot of work around racism, and that's what you're going to do. And I was like, who said that?
Wow.
What is that? I had never, it was such a shock to me. Well, those kinds of things that happen, I didn't think about it again for a really long time. And so my life started to unfold. We ended up getting a house in Mount Juliet, Tennessee. And I started working I was doing theater, but I was also working at the Oasis Center as a residential counselor. And then I got a job where I was actually going into juvenile prison and working with kids doing life skills. I was teaching them filmmaking and screenwriting under the guise of life skills. I was trying to get them to tell their life story so that they could start as sort of an alternative to therapy. It was like, let's get them to think about these things. We'll get them writing their stories. And it was really powerful. I ended up starting a couple youth video programs in Nashville, worked with Bethlehem Center, all kinds of community. I got grants from the Soros Foundation. And I was working for the Oasis Center, which at that time was 88.1% white women. 99%, I would say, or 90% of the people that came through the system, through the shelter for teenagers, were Black, Latino, some Asians, not many. And all of a sudden, I started going, I got that niggly thing inside me going, all the helpers, or all the therapists, everybody's white, great people, good-hearted, most people were there for, I'm assuming, the right reasons. But I was like, this kind of feels funny. And so I started paying attention to things. And then I took my vacation from the Oasis Center and went over to Fisk University for their Summer Institute. They were reviving the Summer Institute, which is a week of scholars and academics and actors and poets and all kinds of people around the world coming together to talk about systemic racism. And that was the beginning of my new life. This was in '97.
When you got introduced to it and really was wow, did you reflect on your childhood and maybe your parents and maybe why it never came up in your household or in your community?
Everything. What happened was, have you ever heard of Dr. Frances Cress Welsing?
Yeah.
Okay. She was one of the very first. I knew Dr. Ray Winbush was the person who was the director of the Race Relations Institute at the time. It's because he changed my life, and I hope he sees this. And he kind of, in some ways, what he tolerated from me in terms of questions, I have so much respect for this guy. I laugh now when I think about who I was then. But you are where you are, and I'm not making fun of anybody who's starting from, but at the time, I was at a program that Dr. Welsing was giving, and it was talking about white privilege. And I was one of probably 3 white people at the conference. I never saw, for a whole week, I didn't see very many white people at all. So, and I was the white person that raised my hand to say, where are all the white people? It was like that. But I met her in the lobby, and she came up to me and said, I want to ask you, you just sat and listened to my presentation. You're here at this conference. What does it feel like for you to hear this? How are you going to use your white privilege to change things, to change the system, to address systemic racism? And I began to say to Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, a renowned psychologist, black psychologist, that, well, actually, you know, I grew up in upstate New York, and, you know, we were on assistance for some time when my father left, and you know, so we didn't really have, you know, the privilege. I mean, I said all of those things
Wow.
to Dr. Welsing, and she spoke to me for almost an hour in the lobby, and it was life-changing. And I went home that night and I cried all the way home, because it unraveled all the things I thought about myself. I was this hip, white, liberal woman who kind of got it enough to where I'd spend my vacation going to the, you know, it was
Right.
all that, there was a little bit of pride in there. I was in the
Right.
early stages. And so anyway, I cried all the way home because I was starting to question who I was and what I was. And for a week, I would say that it was heavy white woman tears, you know, of, oh my God, you know.
Right.
And that week, I began to make commitments within myself. That conversation kind of undid me, because she was like, well, let me explain to you. You know, it was like, you are part of the system. You didn't ask for it, but you are. And there's a lot that you can do. And she said, if you want to, and if you're serious, and this is the thing that changed my life. She said, if you're serious, there are two things that you can do. One is that you can tell black and brown people what white people say when they're not around. And the other thing, oh my God, it just shot out my head. And you can, don't rely on black people to teach you. Be your own educator. And I was like, because, you know, that thing, the temptation to thing is you want to call that black person that you know and say, hey, is it really true? You know, that kind of thing. And so that was the beginning. And then during this period of time, I had already started writing newspaper columns. Well, I started writing about exploring whiteness and privilege. Now, this was in 1997, 98. And luckily, the Tennessean actually had a real newspaper with a real publisher, a real media person. It was John Sigenthaler at the time. And Dwight Lewis was the head of editorials there. And Dwight Lewis started publishing my columns. And so I would get published quite a bit at the Tennessean. And Terry Quillen, Dwight Lewis and Terry Quillen. And Dwight Lewis is probably somebody you need to meet if you haven't already met him.
No, I haven't.
Okay, yeah, you need to hook up with him.
Okay.
But anyway, I started writing columns for them, and I started writing about reparations. And I wrote an article called Riding the Reparations Bandwagon, A White Woman's Perspective. And that article ended up becoming an entire chapter in Dr. Winbush's book that he edited together called Should America Pay?
Wow.
And again, this is going back now. By the time this came out, I think his book came out in 2001. So I had a chapter in a book called Should America Pay?
Right.
And there were a lot of different people in that book, a lot of different perspectives. So, you know, there's so much to say. But anyway, I ended up being invited to be a board member of the Race Relations Institute. Now, the other person that I haven't mentioned yet who really influenced me, and that was a big awakening for me, was Tim Wise, who has become a very dear friend of mine. And we've worked together, and we're friends. But, you know, he's been a mentor and an example. I mean, I don't know that I would have been able to pursue how I did for as long as I did without Tim as an example. And of course, now there are more. There's Peggy McIntosh, who was also a big example. She wrote Unpacking the Knapsack of White Privilege. So in my early days, I began to not like white people very much. Seriously, I went through, and I call it a phase. And I'm, you know, and I laugh now because, you know, I've been married twice. Both my husbands are white. All my parents, everybody around me is white. And I just started feeling this weird feeling. But what I realized was I went through this phase because I was trying to distance myself from this thing. I didn't want to be connected to this thing called systemic white supremacy. And back in the day, remember, this is in the early 2000s, using the words white supremacy, nobody said that, but you know, it was like that was a Malcolm X thing to do. You know what I mean? Nobody said, and white privilege was fairly new. So this was, at the time,
cutting edge.
It was cutting edge, and there was a lot of repercussions for talking about it. And what I didn't realize is that there was probably a latent anger in me anyway, and I channeled it into this. So while there were, in some ways, I feel like it had to happen this way. I mean, I became sort of I was igniting a bit of a fire.
Right.
I know people were a little bit put off. White people,
Right.
even my white friends were. It was like, oh, does she have to?
Yeah,
tell
definitely.
her?
And that's what I'm like. What challenges did you face, maybe with friends, family, peers, colleagues, or what have you, when you went down this path and started calling, like just calling shit out, like, hey, this is
Okay.
this is that. You
I
know?
think I got invited to fewer dinner parties. Dating is different. You know, I mean, by that time, my husband and I had split up in 2001, so I'm now single.
Right.
And I'm doing this. And then what happened was, the more I was writing, the more people were asking me to come and speak about this stuff. And one of the first questions that would come up is, this always came up. They wanted to know who my husband was. And before we were divorced, and I would be out doing workshops and stuff, which I started doing with Dr. Winbush and people at Fisk University, Naomi Tutu, Theda Murphy. All of these people influenced me greatly. But the first question that would come up if I would do a public forum is, they would try to figure out was I married to a black guy? They wanted to know that. You know, and so they would like, so what does your husband think about this? And I would say, my husband doesn't think anything about this. It's, my husband is a musician. I'm something else. And so I would sort of dance with it like that, because I knew they wanted to know, because they wanted to know if they could discount what I was saying.
Right.
And so then I would share that my husband was indeed white.
Right.
And that my father was white, my brother's white, and I love all of these people. So this isn't about me hating white people, although I did go through that phase where I didn't hate white people, but I was just like, oh God. And even, some of my friends at the time, now I have to say, at the time, I knew people that had really big hearts and gave money and that kind of thing, but did not see their everyday participation in it.
Right.
And so I would go, one example, and I'm going to give you the extreme example, but this is before Trayvon Martin. I was invited to go to a community meeting. It was in East Nashville. It was when, big transition happening.
Right.
It was predominantly black for a long time.
Right.
All of a sudden, here comes the neighborhood.
Right.
And so there was a community meeting, because there had been, of course, there's going to be clashes in crime, and there's been a lot of break-ins, and so they were having community meetings. It was white people having community meetings for the most part at, places like Beyond the Edge or whatever.
Okay.
And I remember this one time they brought in the police, the chief of the East Precinct.
Okay.
And so they were having a conversation, and the question was, what was happening is they were putting out an APB on some of the crimes. And this is the exact quote: "If you see a young black male between the ages of 12 and 18 wearing a hoodie, call the police."
Wow.
And that was their, and the only reason I was asked to come to this meeting is because a woman who was African American at Oasis told me exactly what had happened. She said, "You've got to come to this meeting and hear this and maybe, do something."
Right.
Or say something. And so I went to the meeting. Sure enough, they did the same thing. And so I raised my hand and I said, so what is the description of this potential criminal? And they said, well, we just said. And I said, no, that's not a description. That's an indictment of every young black male in this neighborhood. I mean, you've just targeted.
Every young, 12 to 18,
I said, who's not wearing a hoodie?
Right.
The developmental difference between a 12-year-old and an 18-year-old.
Right.
You're not talking about facial hair. You didn't talk about, shoulders, height, weight, nothing. And I said, you've just set every single black house on fire in this neighborhood. And it was horrible. And, people were, and, this one woman, I don't remember her name. I couldn't even spot her if I saw her now. But she raised her hand and she said, well, I was in the kitchen last night doing the dishes, and I looked out in the alley while I'm doing the dishes, and these 3 young black males were walking through the alley with hoodies on, and they had a basketball, and they were going through the alley. And so I called the police. And I said, so do you think they were on their way to play basketball at the community center?
Right.
And her response was, I'm not a racist. You know, it was that knee-jerk kind of thing. So anyway, it was the early days of, you know, and I don't think that I was very skilled in those days at
Right.
handling a lot of this stuff.
Right.
I really, and I also think that I had a little bit of a, you know, I was the white person who got it. Was not helpful.
Right.
But I was, you know, I was on my training wheels.
Right.
You know, and so there would just, I mean, I would be in these situations, and the more I was aware of it, the more situations I would be in.
Right.
And so I wrote an article about that. I didn't call the woman out, but I called the conversation out, and there was a firestorm. And
You like starting fires. You just...
well, I have to say, I mean,
Right.
truthfully, there must have been part of me, and I did
Right.
discover that when I ended up having stage 4 cancer.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and that's what I want to kind of pivot to, because during this, you got stage 4 cancer. You was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. How did that affect your commitment to just social change, or how did that change you internally, like knowing
Well,
that you had
it
this diagnosis?
It changed big time, but it was, first of all, I had to wrestle with getting stage 4 cancer, and I'm not
Right.
one of those people that everything that happens to me, I look at what's going on inside of me, then I'm attracting it. Doesn't
Right.
matter what it is, and even if there's a systemic component to it, okay, but energetically, I really believe that, you know, energy goes where energy flows, or energy flows where energy goes. So
Right.
what's going on here? So I spent, you know, I was in treatment for over a year, chemo and radiation. And what I discovered was that, you know, in looking at the kind of cancer that I had, it was stage 4. Wasn't sure, you know, no one said I was going to die, but a couple people that I knew that I'd been introduced to that had the same thing, you know, died while I was in treatment.
Right.
So, you know, it was a come to Jesus for someone who's not really a Christian, but I had a moment. I mean, a very, very long moment, and so I had to look at the anger. So I was using the fuel from my anger that had nothing to do with racism or anything else. It was something that I came in with.
Right.
And so, and it's not that it's a bad thing to use it for, but it's not long term, it's not sustainable, it's not healthy, and it's not productive. And sometimes, you know, I would respond really quickly, and I still can.
Right.
If you get me on the wrong day, I can. Because there's something about injustice. It really does.
Right.
I mean, and no matter how much, and I said I'm not religious, but I'm, you know, I have a deep connection to spirit and faith.
Right.
And so I know that when I respond really quick and something comes out my mouth that may not just call someone's attention, but somehow shut them down or diminish them, then I've, you know,
Right.
it's not. So I didn't do anything for the whole time. I was about healing. I was on the couch for over a year, and I realized that there was a way to go about this. I would never not be active. I would never
Right.
not be. I mean, I will until the day I die.
Right.
But it's not my profession. I don't want to make a profession of it. Which I was, you know, I've always been a filmmaker, but I was doing a lot of speaking, going to colleges, and I was like, if I'm going to do that again, I'm going to come at it from a different way, and I'm going to start asking people more questions and let them wrestle inside.
Right.
Like I had to. That's what changed me, is I went home and wrestled.
Right.
You know, after meeting Dr. Welsing, I made a plan that I was going to think about being white every day, 24/7, until like time I got up, the time I went to sleep.
Right.
I was going to do nothing but think about being white and what that really means, because I didn't know.
Right.
And I couldn't make it past 10 in the morning. I'd forget all about it. You know, I had to, you know,
You
I
be
had to,
intentional,
yeah, it had to be, it was intentional.
Right.
It was, I made a commitment.
Right. What did you end up coming out with? Have you got the results of that? Or what it means to be white for you?
What it means to be white for me, I understand the responsibility to myself and to those around me to acknowledge, for me, anything, all the systems in place, whether it's
Right.
education or healthcare, but you know, I'm living in the South.
Right.
No one can tell me it's not exacerbated here.
Right.
That's just the way it is. So I've chosen to live here. So by my denial, okay, so what I was getting to, and maybe you can edit, I'm swinging back to that conversation. Swinging back to the conversation at that community meeting. The reason that was important, okay. For me, I felt like the reason it was important and instructive for other white people is that if I, as a white woman, don't realize that my unconscious fear and bias puts young black males at risk, like as vis-a-vis, if you see a young black male between 12 and 18 who's wearing a hoodie, call the police. If I don't realize that my fear of that, my irrational fear of that, if I'm not in check with that and know that that lives inside me and is motivating me, I don't realize that I am part of the system that is inhabited by predominantly black and brown men and women.
Right.
That's how I contribute to perpetuating systemic racism every day that keeps a portion of the population imprisoned and unfree.
Right.
I'm a little freer when I realize that about myself. That's a benefit of being white and being conscious, is that I'm a little freer.
Right.
Because when for instance, if I engage in a lie, and I actually, in the last couple of years, I told what I call a white lie to a friend to cover, I didn't want to out two other people.
Right.
And so I lied. That thing ate me up. And there was something about it until I actually called the friend, came clean.
Right.
I'm telling you, my body calmed down. I didn't even know that I was carrying it. White supremacy is a lie. All white people carry this lie around.
Right.
And it takes the intention, the deliberate commitment to dismantle the lie.
Right.
Otherwise, you're part of the lie. And all white people inside know that.
Why should white people address white privilege?
For that very reason, I think there is, and I'm going to get in trouble saying this, but I really do think that spiritually, and I'm not talking religiously, I'm not a religious person, but spiritually, I do believe that people who do not address inequities, whether it's racism, sexism, religion, whatever it is, that people that don't address this carry that with them and are operating at a spiritual deficit. And I think that you can get away with living your whole life doing that, but you can get away on the outside. I don't think you can get away on the inside.
Right.
And I happen to believe that at the moment when we depart, when people take off from this plane, I do believe that there's a revelation and an understanding of who you really are, and that all of this was manufactured and made up for the purpose of material gain. We know that racism is about economics.
Right.
Every single aspect of it. There's not any instance where it's not about economics. There's always a money trail. So, for instance, there's a new music venue very close to here that is advertising and promoting this new venue. It's an old new venue, but it's in memory of a very, very famous civil rights leader. In fact, the person who's on the street sign out there.
Right.
Okay, I'm going to back up. It matters where money comes from and the spirit of the money. Okay.
I agree.
So when I'm filmmaking, I've been very careful about who I raise money from for my film, because it really does matter. Energetically, it matters.
Right.
So this instance, I'm very happy that there is the honoring of this person. I happen to know that some of the people that have bought this establishment spent New Year's Eve at Mar-a-Lago with Trump, and they are very much in the camp. They are married to people who have businesses that create T-shirts that are pro, very, very conservative,
Right.
and anti,
Right.
whatever. That's not the issue, but you're talking about a venue that carries the cachet
Right.
of one of the most committed, dedicated, sacrificing civil rights leaders.
Right.
And we are living in a state where they just cut out black people's votes
Right.
locally.
Right.
That was what he spent his life doing. So what I'm hoping is that I understand that there is a distant family member that is also a partner of this. My hope is that if they're going to use the name to advertise and to build a wealthy business and a successful venue, that venue is inclusive of the goal of the man who's on the street sign.
And so it's ironic that you bring that up. So I was just listening to like an old clip from Dr. Claude Anderson, and he does a lot of stuff around economics and reparations of black folks, and trying to really come up with a plan and really breaking down by the numbers, right? And he brought up something saying one of the levels of the plan needs to be to highlight businesses, corporations, or organizations that have benefited from slavery and black labor. And he had mentioned, like in his book, I want to say Powernomics. I think that's what it's called, Powernomics. That they had already like found like 200 something organizations, companies or something like that was fundamentally backed by slavery, racism, discrimination, the labor of black folks. And kind of what you're talking about is kind of identifying that, right? Or it's been identified.
It's how it happens currently.
It's how it happens currently. And I'm always rooted for like, calling shit out. Like I really believe, like, especially white folks, if calling folks out that have organizations, that have companies that that's rooted in fundamentally backed by black labor historically, because I feel like we need to know that. And those should be the people that's investing in a reparations fund. Specifically, yeah. Because
and maybe that is the case in
right.
the thing that I was just talking about,
right.
and you probably don't want to use that for the show, but you're right. It's because I don't have the answers. I'm just raising the question, and I'm not accusing anybody of anything.
Right.
But it does seem odd to me that someone that is clearly and very overtly and publicly a public figure who's bought an establishment, but partnered with a relative of it gets real.
But I'm pretty sure that is happening a lot. But it's you just have to find it's hidden, right? It is really hidden because these organizations and companies that has been here 200 years or 300 years. They had to be backed and funded by something.
Well, they were funding the building of slave ships,
right?
And then there were the companies that they financed the slave. They knew what they were building.
Insure slave. Something.
They insured them.
Yeah,
yes.
And they might have split up, and it might be a different name now or whatever. But I'm pretty sure, like, if we get enough dedicated people to do their research and really start like flipping over stuff. I bet most of these companies has been around for a long time or changed their name.
I don't think it's unknown. I think it's already pretty known. Pretty known. It's a matter of what are you going to do about it, and and how do you make people care?
Right.
And for me, getting back to, I don't have, unlike 20 years ago. I know I don't have the answers, but it's the reason I wrote my book.
Right.
I know some of the questions that I had to ask that shifted my understanding and expanded it.
Right.
And I think that's I think that's really, it is a one-on-one thing.
Right.
It's systemic, But in terms of, I've watched people in my life personally who were bristled at the idea of hearing, how many friends that said, do you have to call it the white privilege pop quiz? It's just, they didn't want the term white privilege. And, after they read the first chapter, went, oh. And there's no blame. This isn't about, white people bad, black, it's not about that. It's about what are those things that you don't see because you've never thought of. It's like taking somebody to another country.
Right. You gotta reflect. You got to reflect. You got to work on yourself.
You just work on it, and that's what it is. And it's, it's raising the awareness so that, you're not in lockdown emotionally. Because if you don't know, and this is presented, most people who react in a really quick, knee-jerk way are scared that you're going to take something away from them, you're going to make them feel bad, all of these things. And it's just because they haven't had any exposure internally to where this lives. They don't even understand what internalized biases are. Not just race,
Well, we know the cost of racism for black folks, right? We know what those costs can be. What is some of the costs for white folks when it comes to racism?
Well, as I said to you before, and to me it's a big one, is I think there is a spiritual deficit, certainly, that without acknowledging and doing what you can during your lifetime to disrupt it and change it for other people, I think there's a spiritual deficit. But I think it's deeper than that even. Your ability to have close relationships with a lot of different people, real meaningful relationships. So you're limited culturally, you're limited educationally, you're limited, you live in fear because there's the lie inside of you that you don't realize is there, and so you're reacting to anything outside of that viscerally. That's very stressful. It's not the same kind of stress that a person of color experiences in dealing with systems, but it's stressful to live a lie. It's minimizing. Your life is smaller. And also, once you pierce the deception, the lie, once you pierce the lie, I think there is a deeper wave of compassion and more love that you can experience in the world. And I think I see a lot of people who are really angry and defensive and not living real happy lives. They have a lot of stuff, but and I had to get over, I'm not going to convert every single person that's got 3 yachts and 14 houses. It's not going to happen.
What have been some of the best practices or ways that you've been able to figure out that maybe it could help others, white folks specifically, to be a good ally of people of color, black and brown folks, indigenous folks?
Well, the first thing is to do nothing when you realize that you've had a sort of a revelation. I really think that there's a lot of internal reflecting, questioning, all that kind of stuff.
And let me preface this too: be a good ally without taking up too much space.
Well, for instance, Black History Month. I used to get called all the time for Black History Month. And I realized,
Oh, really?
I did. Oh yeah, are you kidding me? That was my busiest month. That and MLK. But what happened was I'm a freelance filmmaker, writer. I live by what I do, and so I would be compensated for it. Not like big time people or anything, but so you could say to me, oh yeah, you're using systemic racism for your income. Well, you don't do this because it's fun, or because it's not, to me, it wasn't like wealth building, but there was remuneration for it. So I had to, and there got to be a point where people would call me And when I would ask them what they wanted me to talk about, I would say, you know, I actually think a person of color is who you need in this. Sometimes you need me. Sometimes
Right.
you need the white person to talk to the white people. So
right.
that's really my thing is like,
Right.
if you're going to bring me in, I want to talk to white people.
Right.
In fact, I just got brought to Augustana College recently.
Where's that at?
That's in Moline, Illinois.
Okay.
And they brought me in, and it was on a Thursday night. And, you know, it's just last fall. So I hadn't traveled since the beginning of COVID.
Mm-hmm.
Got stuck in Dallas. It was going to be canceled. It was supposed to be at 7 o'clock. I'm stuck in Dallas for 7 hours.
Wow.
And originally I was going to have time to go change clothes, you know, fix my hair.
Right.
And I'm in Dallas. And so they're trying to decide, are we going to cancel? So remember, they've got this on a Thursday night. It's rainy and cold. Really cold in Moline, Illinois. It's like sleeting.
Right.
And the thing is at 7, they've done all this promotion, and it's about white privilege pop quiz, and they geared it towards fraternities, white fraternities and white sororities, and, you know, that's who the audience, and I was expecting, I don't know, I thought they'd have like 10 people, to be honest with you. I was like, you know, there's not going to be a whole lot of people showing up for this.
Right.
And I also didn't see their marketing, so I didn't know, I didn't know whether they were promoting it or whatever.
Right.
Anyway, we realize my gig is at 7, I'm getting in at 6:45. There's no I'm going to make it, so they push it to 8 o'clock.
Okay.
Now I know there's nobody coming. Thursday night,
Right.
8 o'clock, rainy, cold. I got to Augustana. I walked in, and it was a completely full auditorium. And they were
Wow.
having to be really careful because of COVID. So everybody's trying to space out, but there weren't really any spaces. There were over 150 kids.
Wow.
And it was white fraternities, white sororities, and there were definitely students of color there, of course,
Right.
because they always want to hear,
Right.
what are you
Right.
saying? It was the best conversation I've ever had with group kids. And I know that only I could have done that.
Right.
Not only I in the world, but
Right.
just, you know, it was like, okay. And that's, for me, it's like if you could hire a person of color to do this, first of all, everything I've learned about this and discovered is because of people of color.
Right.
But more so, so for me personally, that's how I'm an ally, is if I know
Right.
that they're better off with someone, or it's not something that,
Right.
so that's me in my space.
Right.
Um,
How do you try to navigate and help other white folks become allies? Like, hey, Molly, I'm trying to figure this out. Outside of that, you know, I've done my self-reflecting, which I think is a continuous thing, right?
yeah.
But just continue education around allyship with people of color. Is it like those two things that you would say, hey, you know, tell black folks, you know, what's going on, what's being said. I forgot the other one that you said.
Within reason,
yeah.
yeah.
Within reason, yeah.
Tell them and don't go to them for,
Right.
you know, don't let them, don't make them be your educator.
You know, did you hear about the NFL Brian Flores situation?
A little bit, yeah.
And so Bill Belichick was an unintentional white ally. But I think this is a good. Here's a good situation. I feel like that was a good, like, calling it out or letting your black colleague or peer or friend know about, like, something that's going on. So Brian Flores, a black head coach, former head coach of Miami Dolphins, was let go. That was already
Right.
questionable. So he's going through the interview process with the NFL teams, and he had an interview coming up with the Giants, and there was another guy, Brian Debo, something like that, white coach, same first name. Bill Belichick had congratulated Brian, not knowing which Brian, or confused about which Brian he was texting, and come to find out, because of Bill Belichick and the receipts, the white Brian had already got the job. It had already been done deal without the black Brian even, like, having an opportunity to even, like, sway the leadership of the Giants
wow.
any other way. So he still went in for the interview because this was before the interview even happened and still sat through and everything. But of course, he already knew that he didn't get the job because Bill Belichick told him. And Bill Belichick know he had like messed up. He was like, oh shit, because Brian, the black Brian was like, are you texting the right Brian? Because, you know, because he hadn't even been on the interview yet. And so that was just a perfect example of an unintentional ally in Bill Belichick, because he mistakenly did that. But it's like when we have these opportunities, we really don't even have them because, you know, and many times white folks have already picked that person or already in cahoots. Like, okay, we got you, but because the NFL have this Rudy rule that incentivizes basically pretty much a box that, you know, they can check off and say, hey, we brought in a minority
but we
person,
already hired
to the interview, but we already picked the person. So that was just like, we need more intentional Bill Belichicks.
Yeah, and that's, you know, who's an intentional one, if we're going to talk sports, is, and one of my favorites, and there's more than him, but Steve Kerr is probably the Golden Knights
Warriors.
Or the Warriors. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, powerful ally.
And that's ironic that you bring that up, because the position that he's in now, Mark Jackson, a black coach, was in that position and fundamentally built the team that Steve Kerr took to the championship. And that was a whole nother question too, about like this race. Like, hold on, like Mark Jackson got the team here to the playoffs, and Steve Kerr, you know, and for some reason the leadership like didn't feel like Mark Jackson was the right fit. Steve Kerr comes in, and like I think the next year or the second year they win the championship. And some people was like, how much credit do you give Steve Kerr? And he just comes into the already made situation that Mark Jackson had to build up, and then he was let go. Yeah. And so even that, and I think Steve Kerr recognized that. I think he addressed that. He addressed it maybe. He's
addressed a lot of things, and I mean, and I'm not sure about the specifics of that, and that's, you know, that's valid.
But this is like you know, there was just that you bring it up that he addresses it, but still, probably.
And I'm sure there are things. I mean, I know there are things that I don't see that I encounter that I'm blind to, or that I behave in a particular kind of way. I mean, it's like you said, it's a lifetime. I'm not, you know, this isn't like 6 months. This is
forever.
It's forever. And my phone does ring a lot. Like I do have white people call me all the time. Like if they get into and I always know it. If I haven't heard from them in 2 years, and all of a sudden it's like, hey, listen, I need to run something by you. I know what it is. And I'm not making. I'm happy to be a sounding board, and that's kind of what I've encouraged people to do. Talk to other white people. So I signed up for this job.
White people have to work on white people.
Yeah, I mean, I signed up for this, and you know, it's interesting that. This is another thing that getting me in trouble, but you know, I touched on religion, but I really do believe that religion has helped perpetuate and maintain this for so long. Organized religion, I really believe it. And I think that's just, I mean, worldwide. And you know, the Catholic Church has never, or not the Catholic Church, the Christian religion has never acknowledged to the depth that it still perpetuates this dominance. And you know, we know the history. We know that black people that came here that were made slaves, you know, had to give up their spiritual practices or disguise them. And now there's so much that's politically, people are controlled by religion and these organizations. And you know, I really feel like that's like a big area where that and I don't consider religion spirituality. So you know, I'm not talking about not believing in anything. Although I have to tell you, I'm also I narrate audiobooks, and I just narrated a book. I'm going to give him a shout out. A book called The Bible for Atheists, A Bible for Atheists. And the book could have been called How to Be a Better Thinker. It does not denigrate religion or spiritual beliefs or practices. It's none of that. It breaks down how humans attach to notions of spirituality and religion
Right.
as a way to not engage
Right.
with themselves. I mean, when you ask somebody a question and they quote scripture to you,
Right.
they're not thinking.
Right.
That's not their thoughts. It
Right.
didn't come. It came from something that they've been told to believe, and they weren't taught how to think critically.
Right.
Again, I'm not dismissing religion.
Right.
That's not. Please don't put that on there. But there is a lack of critical thinking universally,
Right.
and that's why banning Mouse and all of these books that have, that's the danger in all of this, is we are
Right.
not teaching critical thinking.
Right.
We should be teaching critical thinking from a very early age so that you can have these controversial texts, things that I don't
Right.
even agree with,
Right.
so that there can be discussion, and we teach people how to break things down in terms of logic and rationale. That still leaves room to have a belief and a
Right.
higher power or
Right. Right.
influence, divine influence.
And that leaves a belief of still, like, I understand the purpose of something, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't have to believe it, but I understand the purpose and the use, how it might help and aid somebody else.
But people lean on it as
yeah.
I mean, it's a
Right.
crutch, but here's the interesting thing. It is a crutch, and it is an AK-47.
Right.
The way it's being used now, the way it's being used in our state. We are in a state right now where we have the most dangerous governor we've ever had. I'm on my knee. I mean, if we could have Bill Haslam back tomorrow, I would like blink my eyes and make it happen. And he was a Republican. We are in huge trouble in Tennessee. The level of, his fanaticism, religious fanaticism, and his insistence that he is right is the most dangerous thing we've ever faced in this state. And we've faced a lot of things in this state, but he is by far, and the voter redistricting is only the middle. It's not even the beginning, it is the middle. And they've been planning this. Conservatives, Christian conservatives, hiding behind Christianity. Their policies having nothing to do with Christianity, but hiding and weaponizing Christianity, have damaged so many lives. I mean, it's really hard to even get at all of the ways in which it's happening, but people have become hypnotized by this. Mm-hmm. And of course, the more that gets exposed. George Floyd exposed so many things. A lot of people had awakenings. A lot of people haven't stopped their awakenings, and I'm really happy to see that.
Right.
And I also know that the room was filled up, the school board room was filled up last night in McMinn County. And they called out the school board and said, you have no right to do this. So these are good things. This means people are thinking, but we have to teach critical thinking.
Right.
And we have a governor that was never suited to be governor, and people are, feeling despondent and feeling like giving up because there's just so much they've accumulated so much power.
What have you noticed, like being in this pandemic that we've been in? What has the pandemic kind of showed us about, like, racial biases and white supremacy? Have you reflected on that? Have you thought about that?
Yeah.
Especially from a health, right? We know from it highlighted health disparities that always been there for a long time, right?
Yeah. And now, who got the vaccines and who didn't, and who is, well, I mean, yes, so much has been revealed through this because there was a hold. People weren't like running off to, whether running off to make money or, some people still had to go to work. Right. But for the most part, the brakes were on for a good 9 months to a year for everybody. Right. And I think that, again, it is if you're at home and there's nothing going on but watching television, hopefully you're not, just watching the news. Right. Because that's very stressful.
And what news are you watching?
Yeah, and what news are you watching? And what non-news are you watching?
Right.
Again, I really think that a lot of what happened is people who were not the least bit concerned about systemic racism woke up a little bit during George Floyd. Right. Only because they were home. only
Right.
because there was nowhere to run.
Right.
And it was right there in front of you. I mean,
Right.
like, 9 minutes and however many seconds that was.
Right.
Um,
And it's unfortunate that it had to be dramatized in that way for
oh,
people to say, "Oh, yeah, I guess these things do still happen." And
these things have been
It
happening
right.
for hundreds of years, and they weren't caught on camera. I mean, the greatest contribution that Stephen Jobs ever did, was the iPhone.
Right.
I mean, all of these things would not be happening
Right.
without the iPhone.
And even with that, it's still hard to get accountability.
Well, see, because it's only the surface.
Right.
There are always people, there are, I'm not even saying that anybody, whether it's me, my book, or Robin DiAngelo, or Abram Kendi, or Tim Wise, or Peggy McIntosh. It's like, yes, people can be impacted if they're educated.
Right.
But you have to want to be educated.
Right.
And that's the thing. And I have to keep coming back. It's like, okay, this is not about, for me, for someone who recovered from stage 4 cancer, this isn't yours to fix.
Right.
But this is part of your work here
Right.
as a human.
Right.
As a human who cares about what happens to other people.
Right.
And who wants to share the planet, who actually wants relationships with lots of different, and you want the richness of
Right.
other people and cultures. And
What does a anti-racist America world, what does that look like? Is that doable? Is that realistic? Or if that could be possible, what would that look like to you?
well, it's funny you say that, because I have, for the past several years, as a writer, I'm always writing something new in my head. But I tried to write a play, or like a short story, not a play. I tried to write a short story about if race, the illusion of race, had never manifested. That racism, which is, and I say to other white people, is racism is a tool to prop up white supremacy. It's just a tool.
Right.
Racism isn't the problem. It's what's used for it, and there's an economic component, which is white
Right.
supremacy is all about
Right.
economics. But I tried to write a story where there was no such thing as race. And I couldn't do
You
it.
can't do it.
I mean, and which makes me kind of sad, because
Right.
I don't have an imagination for it.
Right.
And actually does make me sad.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll, it's so funny, is I'm so aware of this is such a, a person who is white. It's like, I find it, like, I don't want to be angry. I don't
Right.
want to wake up angry. I don't want to feel like I'm in a fight. I really don't. I know when I'm in the pocket and when I'm creating something and I'm really in a rhythm and it feels really good,
Right.
and yet I know that can't happen in a bubble.
Right.
And that is the privilege of a white person, is because I get to say, because if I could easily say, I don't want to be angry, and I don't want to think about this stuff, and I don't want to,
Right.
and then I don't have to. Although for me, I've discovered recently, somebody called me the other day and told me about something that was happening, and without even thinking. I mean, I was mad as a hornet's nest, and then I was on the phone for the whole morning.
Right.
So, it's not really even a choice
Right.
anymore.
Right.
But I don't think it's the answer. I'm not
Right.
saying I have,
And I think, like, speaking of privilege, right, you can get mad at it in a way that I have to be careful about how I get mad about
Exactly. That's the privilege, is that
Right.
my being mad about it it's
it.
nothing.
It's not threatful, right?
It's not threatful.
It's not threatful. But, let me get upset about it.
Exactly.
Yeah,
No,
I'm
and
public
this-
enemy number one in general, but let me be angry
Exactly.
about systemic issues and racial discrimination, and and so I have to have a double conscience. I have to come up with navigation skills, right, on how to figure out how to make it through this, or make it through a day, or or a lifetime.
Well, I'm not in perpetual
Right.
fight or flight mode.
Right. Yeah.
And that, again, one of the greatest privileges is that you don't have to do anything. You don't have to think about it.
Right.
And I'm only as impacted as I want to be.
Right. And that's the privilege.
And that's the privilege. So, yeah, it's, and I never imagined that 20 years ago or 25 years ago, whenever I first started thinking about these things, I never imagined that we'd be sitting here talking today, and things would be almost worse than they were.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I'm going to say this, I don't know if they're worse. It's just that we know what they are.
Right.
Now we see more.
Right.
But the jury rigging or the district rigging that just happened, that is, we've gone back to 1950 something.
Yeah, and it's so difficult because many of us are so miscegenated now, right? So mixed in that on the surface, everything can look good and sweet, and things like the redistricting probably just went over a lot of people's heads, and really don't know really how harmful that really is and was and is going to be until really is last minute.
Because, and I don't want to get into them and us because I don't believe in all that.
Right.
But there is a conservative agenda, and the agenda is to keep people in turmoil.
Right.
Keep people in turmoil, keep them uneducated, keep them so busy trying to survive that they don't have time to really assess and be educated and be, when you think about it, if you're in constant fight or flight mode, you're thinking about how you're going to eat and how you're going to stay alive that night.
Right.
You're not thinking politics.
Right.
And if you're not being if you're not learning in school and everybody's not learning together what's what, and critical thinking isn't being taught. So then you've got there are people that are doing good work out there from a completely emotional place that, again, and they're not aware of what's rooting, what's going on inside of them.
Right.
I mean, if you're acting from a place of fear and anger and desperation, there's not a whole lot of hopefulness in that. So it's how do you stay in alignment and do the work? And that's for me, is like, I try to keep myself in check and be wise with my words and not be a loose cannon, because it's too easy, especially now.
Right.
Everybody's mad, everybody's yelling, everybody's saying something.
A whole bunch of noise.
A bunch of noise, and that is when you asked me what came out of the cancer, is like, I got quiet for a couple of years, really quiet, and I was like, I'm not saying anything until I really have something to say, and everything that I had to say is in that book.
What's next for you?
Well, I'm a filmmaker, and I've been making a film for 7 years, Scouting for Diamonds.
Okay.
COVID hit and we lost our finishing funds, so we've kind of been in limbo with that. So I'm looking to finish that hopefully in the next year.
Okay.
And I narrate books. In fact, Audible just approached me. The book did, for a self-published book, it did really well. It was #1 for 4 weeks over it.
You can put it up for the camera. Yeah.
It's my book. It's great. Looking in the mirror, reflection. The book did really well locally, and because of that, Audible, I narrate audiobooks, and Audible approached me and said, hey, we'd like to produce your book.
Wow.
We'll have you narrate it. We'll promote it. So we just finished doing it in the fall. It's coming out any day now. Actually, you can download.
Yeah,
Thank you.
congratulations, yeah.
I mean, if you go to Audible right now and type in my name, you can get the book. It just doesn't have the new artwork in it, and I don't know why they haven't put new artwork in, but it's available. So for people if you don't read, you don't have time to read, you can put this on in the car.
Yeah, no.
And I really was mindful when I wrote it. It was like, I'm not about attacking people. I'm not about diminishing people for what they don't know or assuming that I know better. All I know is that there were some questions that got me to really see the world differently myself and understand my relationship to it, so that I didn't have to carry this defensiveness saying this isn't my problem. But it's funny in places. It's revealing. I tell some stories on myself about when I was first starting out. Thought that I was the white person who knew everything.
Typical of a white person.
Exactly. Well, you know what? I'm going to quote this really good friend of mine. Used to say to me, this is a long time ago, she said, you know what's hard about being friends with y'all? So she goes, y'all always have to be the experts. And man, did that hurt my feelings at the time, many years ago. And I was like, oh my God, she's so right. You know, and that was part of it. And she and I have been friends since the year I moved here. So we had, before my going to Fisk and doing some work, we were really good friends for 4 years. And then I had to go, oh my God.
And I'm going to go a little deeper than that. The indoctrination of white supremacy, you know, we're all affected by it. So even me as a black person is being conditioned and growing up, I can honestly feel that white people do know more. White people are the experts. White people are right. White is right, right? And so that's a characteristic of mannerism and indoctrination by white supremacy that black folks carry around, because like we seeing it through, if all of our teachers are white or white women, right? Everybody that we see on TV, propaganda, movies, and they're the ones that hold these titles and they're always the smart characters, are always saving the world and stuff like that. That's conditioning.
Yeah.
You know, and so
which thank God that it is changing. You look at the head of Netflix, the head of diversity at Netflix, and things are changing. And that to me is, but that's how it. You perpetuate it within.
That's how I perpetuate it, exactly.
Yeah, but can we say something about Black History Month?
Go ahead.
Right.
It's Black History Month.
And here's my thing about Black History Month is that we talk about honoring, you know, all these amazing achievements by Black people who have invented more things that have been taken, that white people have taken credit for in the last couple of 100 years. And we're now starting to realize all these things. I mean, there's just hundreds and thousands of inventions and discoveries and medical, you know, all kinds of things. We talk about, you know, Black history, about the achievements, but the focus, it should be on the achievements of Black people, but it's the reason those achievements are so magnificent because all of these things were done in the face of white supremacy. In the midst of white supremacy. That's why these achievements are great. It's not because that Black person's exceptional. It's because they did this in spite of being told, your brain is not the equivalent of a white person. All of those things, those early things that were done.
Not having the same access to things, not having the same resources.
Exactly.
You know, being outlawed to be able to read.
Oh yeah,
you know?
Inherit property. You know, there are
Yeah.
still laws in the books. You know, there's a couple counties in Tennessee where still a Black person cannot inherit property. And I did a workshop actually at
I didn't know that.
Well, I didn't either. But I did a workshop with a group of women about when my book first came out, and it was a group of Belmead women. There were a couple lawyers in there, and one of the women, they read my book as part of their book club, and she said she was reading it going, well, wait a minute, because I have a whole thing on there about inheriting property and about what that means generationally. And she said there are still laws on the books where people in Tennessee cannot inherit property, and she said she's in her mid-70s, and she said that's what I'm working on from now until I go. So I have hope. I know we talked about, I have a lot of hope, and I have to say I am in the midst of this storm. I wanted to say shitstorm, but I probably shouldn't. But in the middle of this maelstrom of conflict and ugliness, really, I am hopeful. I am hopeful, and I have to be hopeful, or I wouldn't get up in the morning. But I've seen it. I have seen a difference. I've seen my friends grow. I've seen people in my sphere grow. I get letters from total strangers. So I have to be inspired and move forward, knowing, okay, that was one more person. That was one more person. That was one more person.
Right.
And one more person, you know, someday there's going to be a person that we look up and go, oh my God, that's so-and-so from 5th grade, you know.
Well, Molly, I appreciate your time. Well, I appreciate this conversation.
I hope it wasn't too rambling.
No, and I appreciate you opening up and just really calling shit out. And yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for
asking me. And people go get the book, White Privilege Pop Quiz, Reflecting on Whiteness.
I'm showing it right now.
Yeah, she's showing it, and I have my copy that's gonna get signed.
And this is for you to give to someone else.
And she gave me. We're not gonna say why you giving me 2 books, but but thank you again, and
well, thank you, and thank you for doing this show. I love this format. I love this room.
Thank you,
and I hope it gets as big as you want it to get.
Yeah. Take over the world.
Take over the world.
All right, Molly. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks.